My wife cheated during my cancer fight. What I did next will leave you speechless. Hello, read it. They say your life flashes before your eyes in moments of crisis, but that's not true. When I sat in the doctor's office and heard the words stage 3 pancreatic cancer, my mind didn't fill with memories of my kids or my wife, or even the things I hadn't done yet. Instead, it went completely blank. For a moment, I wasn't even sure if I was still breathing. My name is Adam. I'm 44, a civil engineer, and up until 6 months ago, I thought I had everything under control. A steady career, 2 incredible kids, and a marriage that, while not perfect, felt like a partnership I could count on. If you had asked me back then, I would have told you I was one of the lucky ones. I had a stable life, a clear future, and a family I'd built my world around. Then the cancer diagnosis came, and it was like someone pulled the rug out from under me. I'd been ignoring the symptoms for months: persistent stomach pain, unexplained fatigue, even a little weight loss that I brushed off as a bonus to my slowing metabolism. It wasn't until the pain became unbearable that I dragged myself to the doctor, expecting to hear something minor. An ulcer, maybe, or some dietary issue. But after a series of scans and blood tests, they gave me the news: stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis wasn't promising. Surgery was possible, but there were no guarantees. Even with aggressive treatment, the survival rates weren't exactly encouraging. It felt like the universe had flipped a switch, and everything I thought I knew about my life was suddenly uncertain. But that wasn't the worst of it. No, the worst came 2 weeks later, when I found out that the person I'd planned to lean on, the woman I'd shared my life with for nearly 2 decades, had been cheating on me. Lauren and I met when I was 26. She was everything I wasn't: bold, outgoing, full of life. I was drawn to her instantly, and for years, I believed we had built something solid together. We had our share of struggles like any couple, but I thought we always worked through them as a team. We built a family, 2 kids who were my pride and joy, a house filled with memories, and a life that felt secure. Sure, there were times Lauren seemed distant, but I chalked it up to stress or the natural ebb and flow of a long marriage. I never suspected there was something darker beneath the surface. The discovery of her affair came completely out of nowhere, and in the cruelest of ways. It happened on a Saturday. I was sitting at the kitchen table, organizing some insurance paperwork and pretending I wasn't thinking about my next doctor's appointment. Lauren had gone upstairs to shower, leaving her phone on the counter. When it buzzed, I glanced at it out of reflex. I wasn't expecting to see anything unusual, maybe a text from her mom or one of her friends. But the message that appeared on the screen stopped me cold. Can't wait to see you tonight. Last night was incredible. The contact was saved under a single letter: J. At first, I thought there had to be some explanation. Maybe it was an inside joke or a misunderstanding. But as I stared at the message, the sinking feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking as I scrolled through the previews of past messages. There wasn't much. Lauren was meticulous, deleting most of the thread, but there was enough to confirm what I already feared. She was seeing someone else. For the next week, I didn't say a word. I kept the discovery to myself, observing her closely, trying to piece together the truth without tipping her off. The signs were subtle but unmistakable. The way she seemed glued to her phone, smiling at messages she claimed were work updates, the sudden errands that took hours longer than they should have, the way she avoided my eyes when we were alone. I started noticing patterns I'd ignored before. The frequent girls' nights out that never included her usual friends. The way she always seemed just a little too put together when she left the house. In hindsight, the signs had been there for months, maybe even years, but I'd been too blind to see them. And the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I was fighting for my life, battling a disease that might kill me, and she was out sneaking around with someone else. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and above all, determined. Confronting her wasn't an option, not yet. I wasn't ready for the fallout, and I needed time to figure out my next steps. So instead, I focused my energy on something else: protecting my kids. They were my everything, the reason I got out of bed in the morning, even when the weight of the cancer and Lauren's betrayal threatened to crush me. If I didn't make it, I wanted to make sure they were taken care of, that they had a future, even if I wasn't there to see it. That's when the idea came to me. I contacted my lawyer the following week. Quietly, without telling Lauren, I rewrote my will. Every cent I had, savings, assets, investments, would go to my children. Lauren wouldn't get a dime. I set up trusts for the kids, ensuring that the money would be protected until they were old enough to use it responsibly. But I didn't stop there. I knew that if Lauren found out about my illness, she might try to manipulate the situation to her advantage. She had already shown me where her loyalties lay, and I couldn't trust her to act in the best interest of our family. So I made a decision that would change everything. I would keep my diagnosis a secret. Hiding the truth wasn't easy. I went to appointments alone, lied about where I was going, and endured the grueling side effects of chemo in silence. Some days, the effort felt unbearable. The pain, the exhaustion, the constant deception, it all weighed on me. But every time I thought about giving up, I pictured my kids, their smiles, their laughter, their futures. They were my reason for everything. As for Lauren, she continued her charade, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. I watched her carefully, biding my time, knowing that the moment I revealed the truth, nothing in our lives would ever be the same. Keeping secrets is exhausting, especially when your body is actively betraying you. Each day felt like a delicate balancing act as I tried to maintain the appearance of normalcy while hiding the truth about my diagnosis and my knowledge of Lauren's affair. I told myself I was doing it for the kids. They deserved stability, a sense of normalcy, even if the foundation beneath their world was cracking. But the truth was I needed time to plan, to prepare, to make sure everything was in place before I set the dominoes falling. Lauren remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. She carried on with her routines, texting Jay when she thought I wasn't looking, leaving the house under the pretense of errands or work. She had perfected the art of deceit, but now that I knew what to look for, it was painfully obvious. Every lie she told, every excuse she made, added another layer to the wall growing between us. The chemo sessions were brutal. I'd heard stories about how draining the treatments could be, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality. The nausea, the fatigue, the constant ache in my bones, it felt like my body was being broken down piece by piece. I didn't tell anyone where I was going during those long afternoons at the hospital. I'd leave the house with some vague excuse, an extra work meeting, a quick trip to the hardware store, and come back hours later, drained but determined not to let it show. The hardest part was the evenings. After putting the kids to bed, I'd sit in the dark, too exhausted to move, too wired to sleep. My mind would spiral, replaying every moment of the day, every decision that had led me to this point. The anger I felt toward Lauren was almost eclipsed by the sadness. How had we gotten here? How had the woman I once loved so deeply become a stranger who could lie to my face without hesitation? I spent weeks digging into Lauren's affair, piecing together the timeline and trying to understand just how deep the betrayal went. She was careful, more careful than I had anticipated. But even the most meticulous liar leaves traces. I found credit card statements with charges for expensive dinners at restaurants I'd never been to, receipts for hotel stays under her name, text messages she hadn't bothered to delete from her phone's cloud backups, filled with the kind of intimate exchanges that made my stomach turn. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became, not just at her, but at myself. How had I missed this? How had I allowed myself to become so complacent, so trusting, that I didn't see the signs until it was too late? But even as the anger burned, a strange sense of clarity emerged. I realized that I couldn't let her actions define the rest of my life, however long that might be. I couldn't let her take away my dignity, my legacy, or the future I wanted for my children. So I doubled down on my preparations. I met with my lawyer again, updating the trust to include even stricter provisions. Lauren would have no access to the funds, no matter what legal loopholes she tried to exploit. I also made arrangements for my brother, Ethan, to act as the trustee in the event of my death. Ethan was the one person I knew I could count on to protect my kids, no matter what. But there was one loose end I hadn't yet addressed: Lauren's affair. I knew that if I confronted her too soon, It could jeopardize everything. She might try to fight me in court, use my illness as leverage, or manipulate the situation to her advantage. I couldn't risk it, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore the growing resentment festering inside me. The breaking point came one night when she left the house claiming she was meeting a friend for drinks. I waited until she was gone, then called that same friend under the guise of needing to speak to Lauren. Her confusion told me everything I needed to know. Lauren wasn't meeting a friend. She was with Jay. I followed her that night, keeping a safe distance as she drove across town. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white, the adrenaline coursing through me making my heart race. She pulled into a quiet neighborhood and parked in front of a house I didn't recognize. A moment later, a man emerged from the front door, tall, athletic, with an air of confidence that made my blood boil. They embraced like they didn't have a care in the world, completely oblivious to the fact that I was sitting just a few yards away, watching their every move. I didn't confront them. Not then. Instead, I drove away, my mind racing with possibilities. The sight of Lauren with another man, laughing and carefree, felt like the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. But it also solidified my resolve. The next day, I began gathering evidence. I hired a private investigator to document the affair, ensuring that I would have concrete proof if Lauren ever tried to fight me in court. I knew the road ahead would be messy, but I was determined to come out of it with my dignity and my kids' future intact. Through it all, I kept my illness a secret. The thought of Lauren knowing what I was going through, of her using it to manipulate or guilt me, was unbearable. My pain was mine alone to bear, and I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of knowing how deeply she had hurt me. Each day became a test of endurance, physically, emotionally, and mentally. The cancer was relentless, the treatments grueling, and the weight of my deception heavier than I had anticipated. But I held on to the knowledge that I was doing the right thing, not for Lauren, but for my kids. The morning after the confrontation, the house felt different, quieter, heavier, like the air itself had absorbed the weight of the truth. Lauren avoided me entirely, retreating to our bedroom and shutting the door as though she could hide from the consequences of her actions. The kids went about their routines, blissfully unaware of the storm raging beneath the surface of their home. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. The confrontation had drained me in ways I hadn't anticipated, but it also left me with a strange sense of clarity. For months, I had been living under the shadow of two secrets, my diagnosis and Lauren's affair. Now, one of them was out in the open, and I was determined to handle the other on my own terms. Lauren's betrayal had broken something fundamental in our marriage, something that couldn't be repaired. I knew at the moment she tried to deflect responsibility during the confrontation, blaming me for her choices instead of owning up to them. Her tears, her apologies, her attempts to justify what she had done, they were all meaningless to me now. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I had been when I first discovered the affair. The rage had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, steady resolve. I wasn't going to fight with Lauren. I wasn't going to beg for explanations or closure. I was going to move forward, with or without her. That morning, I called my lawyer again. The evidence I had gathered from the private investigator was more than enough to prove Lauren's infidelity, and I wanted it on record. I asked him to begin drafting the divorce papers, making it clear that my priority was protecting my kids and ensuring Lauren had no access to the inheritance I had set aside for them. Lauren must have suspected what I was doing, because by the afternoon, she finally came out of the bedroom and approached me. She looked wrecked. Her eyes were red and swollen, her voice hoarse from crying. She didn't beg this time. Instead, she asked me to reconsider, to think about what a divorce would mean for the kids. She said she wanted to fix things, to go to counseling, to rebuild what we had lost. But her words felt hollow, like an echo of the promises she had already broken. I told her the truth, that there was no fixing this, no path forward for us as a couple. I told her I didn't trust her anymore, and that trust was the foundation of any relationship. Without it, we had nothing. She tried to argue, but I cut her off. I told her about the changes I had made to my will about the trust I had set up for the kids, and about my intention to move forward with the divorce. I didn't tell her about my diagnosis. I wasn't ready for that yet. But I made it clear that I was done playing along with her charade. In the days that followed, Lauren's behavior became increasingly erratic. She swung wildly between guilt and anger, trying to win me back one moment and lashing out at me the next. She accused me of being cold, of giving up too easily, of throwing away years of marriage without giving her a chance to make things right. But her words didn't move me. I'd already given her the chance to make things right, and she had chosen to lie, to betray me, to build a life with someone else while pretending to be my partner. There was no going back. The kids started noticing the tension, and I hated that they were caught in the middle. My son, Ethan, asked me one night if Mommy and Daddy were mad at each other. I told him we were working through some things, but that we both loved him and his sister more than anything. It broke my heart to lie to him, but I wasn't ready to explain what was really happening. They didn't need to know the details, not yet. As the weeks passed, the divorce proceedings began to take shape. My lawyer was thorough, ensuring that every aspect of the agreement prioritized the kids' well-being and protected the assets I had worked so hard to secure for them. Lauren fought back at first, hiring her own lawyer and trying to argue for a larger share of the finances, but the evidence of her infidelity left her with little leverage. The process was grueling, but it gave me something to focus on, a purpose to keep me moving forward despite the pain and fatigue of my treatments. I found a strange sense of strength in the act of reclaiming control over my life, even as my body continued to betray me. It wasn't until a month later that I finally told Lauren the truth about my illness. By then, the divorce was well underway, and the battle lines had been drawn. I hadn't planned to tell her, but she caught me one afternoon as I was coming back from a chemo session. I was pale, exhausted, and moving slower than usual. She asked me what was wrong, and for a moment, I considered lying again. But something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe I was just tired of carrying the burden alone. I told her everything. I told her about the diagnosis, about the treatments, about the prognosis that hung over me like a shadow. I told her that I had been fighting this battle in silence, even as she carried on her affair, because I didn't trust her to support me. Her reaction was a mixture of shock, guilt, and anger. She accused me of keeping secrets, of shutting her out, of not giving her the chance to be there for me. But I didn't regret keeping it from her. The truth was, she had already shown me who she was. I couldn't rely on her, couldn't trust her, and I wasn't about to let her use my illness as a way to manipulate me or the kids. By the time the divorce was finalized, I felt like a different person. The anger and heartbreak hadn't disappeared, but they had been replaced by a sense of determination. I wasn't going to let Lauren's betrayal define me. I wasn't going to let the cancer win. My kids were my priority, and every decision I made from that point on was for them. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my life again. And that was enough to keep me going. The day the divorce was finalized, I felt an odd mix of emotions. Relief, yes, but also a strange emptiness. For 18 years, Lauren had been a central part of my life. Even after discovering her betrayal, there had been a bitter familiarity in the routine of living under the same roof, a strange comfort in knowing what to expect from her duplicity. Now, with the paperwork signed and the marriage officially over, it felt like I had closed the door on an entire chapter of my life. Lauren moved out that afternoon. She didn't take much, just her clothes, a few personal items, and some knickknacks she claimed had sentimental value. Watching her leave wasn't as satisfying as I'd imagined. There was no triumphant sense of closure, no feeling of winning. It was just quiet. Once her car disappeared down the street, I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where her things had been. For a long time, I stayed there, trying to process everything that had led to this moment. In the weeks that followed, the house took on a new energy. It was just me, Ethan, and Lily now, and while the adjustment was challenging, it also felt like a fresh start. I focused on creating a sense of stability for the kids, something they desperately needed after months of tension and uncertainty. We developed new routines. I started cooking more, experimenting with recipes that often turned out horribly but made the kids laugh. We had game nights every Friday, complete with popcorn and board games that almost always ended with someone accusing someone else of cheating. Saturdays became our adventure days, whether it was a trip to the park, a museum, or just exploring new hiking trails. These little moments became the foundation of our new life. They were simple, ordinary, but they gave us a sense of normalcy that we all craved. Lauren's relationship with the kids grew strained after the divorce. They didn't understand the full extent of what had happened. I had kept the details of her affair to myself, but they weren't blind to the changes. Ethan, especially, seemed to pick up on the subtle tension between us. At first, he didn't say anything, but one evening, as I was tucking him into bed, he asked me why Mom wasn't around as much anymore. His voice was hesitant, like he was afraid of the answer. I paused, trying to find the right words. I didn't want to lie to him, but I also didn't want to burden him with more than he could handle. I told him that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, and that those mistakes can hurt the people around them. I told him that his mom and I were better off living separately, but that we both loved him and Lily more than anything. He didn't ask any more questions that night, but I could tell he was still processing everything. In the days that followed, he became quieter, more introspective, as though he was trying to piece together the puzzle on his own. Meanwhile, my own health continued to be a constant battle. The chemo treatments were brutal, leaving me drained and nauseous more often than not. There were days when I could barely get out of bed, when the pain and fatigue felt insurmountable. But no matter how bad it got, I forced myself to keep going. For Ethan, for Lily, for the future I was fighting to secure for them. The journaling became my lifeline. Every night, after the kids were asleep, I would sit at my desk and write. I wrote about my childhood, my dreams, my struggles, and my hopes for Ethan and Lily. I wanted them to have a record of who I was, something they could turn to when they were older and had questions I might not be around to answer. As the journal filled with pages, I found myself reflecting more on the man I used to be, the one who had trusted too easily, who had taken his health and his marriage for granted. That man was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, more focused, and, in some ways, more at peace. Lauren reached out to me a few months after the divorce, asking if we could talk. She wanted to apologize, she said, to explain herself and clear the air. I agreed to meet her, not because I wanted to hear her excuses, but because I wanted to close the door on that part of my life once and for all. We met at a coffee shop, a neutral place where the ghosts of our past wouldn't linger. Lauren looked different, tired, unsure of herself, like someone who had been carrying the weight of her own mistakes for too long. She apologized genuinely this time and admitted that she had made terrible choices. She said she regretted what she had done, not just to me, but to the kids. She asked if there was any chance we could rebuild some kind of friendship for their sake. Her words were sincere, and for the first time, I believed her. But I told her the truth, that while I appreciated her apology, there was no going back to the way things were. Too much had been broken, too much trust destroyed. We parted on civil terms, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of closure. The one-year anniversary of my diagnosis came and went quietly. There was no grand celebration, no dramatic reflection. Just me and the kids, sharing a simple dinner at home, laughing over the mess I made trying to bake a cake from scratch. As I watched them that night, their faces lit up with joy, I realized something profound. I wasn't just surviving. I was living. The cancer was still there, an ever-present shadow, but it no longer defined me. My life wasn't about the illness or the betrayal or the mistakes of the past. It was about the moments I was creating now with the people who mattered most. I don't know what the future holds. None of us do. But I do know this. I've done everything I can to protect my kids, to give them a life filled with love and stability, to leave them with a legacy they can be proud of. And in the end, that's enough.